T-Mobile really wants to convince states that merging with Sprint is a good idea. But you know what's a good idea? Buying an Apple Watch, according to the Android Police podcast.
It's Friday, November 8th. Welcome. I'm David Ruddick alongside Corbin Davenport, and let's jump right into this week's T-Mobile announcements with Jules.
Hey everyone. So let's talk about what's exactly been going on this week in terms of carrier news, because of course we love to talk about the carriers here. They're the best things that we like to talk about at Android Police. So the FCC officially approved the Sprint and T-Mobile merger this week, and that was, I don't know, like a couple weeks after they unofficially took the votes and then spent 2 weeks trying to decide how to message it and whatnot. And that has given T-Mobile a couple of weeks to do its own spin machine and try to figure out how it can best pacify the 15 state attorneys general, plus the one from DC, in terms of their concerns about a whole variety of issues such as equity, access to the network, and prices and whatnot. So here's the rundown of announcements that we have going on here, which I shall post into the Twitch chat right about now. So we're talking about 5G. Their network is launching on December 6th. And that's going to be mostly 600 megahertz. Actually, in fact, I don't think they have anything in the millimeter wave holdings just yet. And if not, well, if they hold anything, they're still building it out.
In the
meantime,
T-Mobile is actually live millimeter wave in New York and one other place that I'm forgetting right now. It might be Chicago, like Verizon as well. But they do have a live mil wave network, so they do have some licenses.
But they still get to call the 600 meg stuff 5G. It's just going to be not too impressive, like 70 megabits, 100 megabits maybe. You'll see that happen. It's going to cover 200 million people because of its low band characteristics, wide spread coverage. They say 5,000 cities, and you're going to get this on the Galaxy Note 10 Plus 5G and the OnePlus 7T Pro 5G. McLaren, some of the longest titles for phones since I don't know when, back when LTE was just getting started, and we were all excited for that. So mouthfuls to say over there. More mouthfuls regarding the equity initiatives that they're launching into. They're partnering with a bunch of civil rights groups to do more, but in terms of the main ones that we're talking about, there's Project 10 Million. This is supposed to support 10 million families in roughly rural, low-income areas, and they're going to get free internet service, 100 gigabytes per year, plus Wi-Fi hotspot, and that's mainly to cover kids. They say the homework gap, where schools are starting to incorporate a lot more digital elements, online elements into their daily workflow. So that's something to consider. They are also considering giving discounts on phones and tablets and other devices. They say that this package is going to be worth $10.7 billion. They like throwing in the money here because that's how much of a sacrifice they're willing to give up in order to make sure that this deal is going through. Another thing, T-Mobile Connect. Those are plans that are going to cost even lower than the lowest cost plans right now, which is $30 a month. It's going to be accessible to everyone, every customer. So you get talk, text, unlimited. And then you have 2 gigs of high-speed data for $15 a line a month, 5 gigs for $25 a line a month. And then you're supposed to get, for the next 5 years, 6 gigabytes a year, roughly speaking. It's 500 megabytes, but they like to do soft, fuzzy math on those gigabytes in terms of counting it and then charging you for it. So there's that. So perhaps you might get up like 35 gigabytes for $25 a month if you stay on for the next 5 years. And then you have a thing with the first responders. Connecting Heroes, they're going to spend, I think the number is 7 billion or so over the next 10 years to provide free service to all public and nonprofit police, EMT, fire agencies, and that's all who sign up. Uh, all this is in effect to try and address those concerns about competition, whether the quantity is going down, but will the quantity the quality keep up with it? So I'm just wondering what you guys think in terms of that threshold right now, at least. David, what do you think about where this is at?
I think that I don't have a good understanding of where the state lawsuits are at in terms of what the likelihood of the outcome is. I don't think anybody does at this point until we get into a courtroom, and we'll see what the judges say. And of course, then there will be appeals, and this process will go on for a long time. I think what T-Mobile's play here is to make it look as though they're basically providing concessions. The idea is we're doing X, Y, Z, A, B, C, D, E, F, G. Like, there are so many things packed into this. A lot of them are of questionable value, but when you put them into a bulleted list, they do look impressive. They look like they're taking action as opposed to merely stating things. So I think you've got numbers there. You've got affordability. You've got reaching people who have needs that maybe aren't being met by other carriers. The whole idea being, well, if we enable this merger, then we can provide all of these things, and hopefully T-Mobile's bit play here is not to use this in the lawsuit. It's to use it to get states to drop the lawsuit. So this is all negotiation. So I think what you're going to see is a bit of kind of pork barrel politics go on here, where T-Mobile is sitting down with each of these states, and the states are saying, well, we want you to do A, B, and C for our state because we think those are important issues. And if you do that, we'll consider dropping out of this lawsuit, as a couple of states already have, actually. So I do wonder how much ammunition T-Mobile will be able to come up with there. Big states like California, I imagine, are going to be much harder to appease. So we'll see what happens. I don't have a good feel for where that lawsuit's going to go. Obviously, the FCC okayed the merger, but everybody knew they would. But whether or not T-Mobile is going to be, I really doubt they'll be able to do enough to get everybody, out of the lawsuit. There are definitely still going to be some states in play.
Yeah, and Corbin, I think you and I have talked about this point as well, is that maybe Sprint might not have, is it meant long for the world anyways? So, we've talked about, the three carrier market being a thing, whether or not this deal happens. How much more like is this really do or die for them at this point? Especially as we've talked about or seen the WeWork saga, as well as criticisms into SoftBank's Global Vision Fund, as that's starting to get more winded up.
I mean, it's a really difficult question to try to figure out if Sprint, if it would have been a valid competitor in the long term, because obviously it wasn't doing hot. It's been at number 4 as long as I can remember. But it's also continuously shot itself in the foot. And, throughout this entire merger, it was basically saying, there's no way we'll be able to be a competitor. We have to merge with T-Mobile. And if you're convincing yourself that you can't do something, you're definitely not going to do it. So I don't know. It's a really tough question to try to answer. All I've done is, I mean, Canada is kind of a model for this because Canada only has 3 major carriers now, right? I believe so. Yeah, and their mobile situation's not good. Their prices are very high.
Yeah, not quite the healthiest of situations over there. I think it would be helpful to frame this when we bring in our next story into the fray, because really we're talking about a fighting in the bottom end of the price spectrum in terms of these carriers. That's been driving a lot of the change in the cellular industry over the past, say, half decade to decade. in terms of contracts, in terms of more perks, in terms of that sort of thing. But we see AT&T just doing its own thing still. Talked about that $60 million fine from the FTC, new unlimited plans that stretch the meaning of unlimited, and now we're talking about this latest deal. Not really a deal. It's something that you can't refuse. Godfather references not intended there. AT&T is basically doing the same thing it has done to its grandfathered unlimited data plan holders from like 2011, and that's to hike the price of their plans. Now, this is $10 a month they are giving 15 gigabytes more data. They call it a bonus, but when you're held at, basically hostage point to like pay more for it, you'd question the bonus part of it anyways. So, but this is AT&T just being AT&T and still regarding its main competition ostensibly as Verizon. And I'm asking well, let's go back to Corbin on this one for first take on this. What do you think is Sprint and T-Mobile irrelevant to the equation, like in terms of reforming practices at the big carriers?
I mean, part of my sort of jaded approach to the T-Mobile and Sprint merger is the fact that T-Mobile has become far less competitive recently. There was that big push a couple years ago where they were slashing prices and actually being very competitive against AT&T and Verizon. But now they've sort of mucked up all their plans where it's kind of the same multi-tiered unlimited plans that everyone else has with confusing asterisks. So it's, yeah, I think it's T-Mobile's getting a little bit less of a uncarrier, as they like to put it. So
Yeah, I think Corbin's absolutely right about that. T-Mobile has become much less of a downward pressure on AT&T and Verizon. That's not to say they're not still bleeding subscribers away from them. They obviously are.
yeah.
Both Verizon and AT&T's postpaid growth for the past year or two has been really terrible, and it's been because of T-Mobile very specifically. So we do see T-Mobile offering, I'd say T-Mobile, the area they are on the forefront of value for consumers, are incentives. When you're talking about free subscriptions, value adds like Netflix, there are other things they offer too. T-Mobile's like stupid, like their like kind of giveaway they do every week that, where basically they broke dominoes. T-Mobile's very good at the gimmick. I mean, it's something that John Ledger, I call him a circus clown in jest, but like he kind of is the ringmaster over there, and he's like throwing things into the audience. He's got a t-shirt cannon. That's kind of like the CEO / head of marketing persona that he's really taken on, and that's really leveraged into it plays into how T-Mobile does business. There's a lot of flash. There's a lot of we're going to do something nobody's ever done before. That's what T-Mobile says basically every time they make an announcement. Nobody's ever tried this. It's crazy. So I think you still do get some pressure from T-Mobile there, and it's actually been pretty effective. AT&T and Verizon have been slow to pivot that way. Verizon, has started bundling things. AT&T bundles HBO, but if you've tried using the HBO bundling on AT&T with an applicable plan, good luck. I've been trying to use it for months, and half time it doesn't even work at all. So I think T-Mobile has shown a agility that AT&T and Verizon haven't. And AT&T hiking prices like this, it's totally about margins. AT&T is doing this just because they're leveraged to the moon is with debt right now. AT&T went acquisition crazy the last few years, and they're bleeding, tons and tons of direct TV subscribers. So investors aren't happy with AT&T. And one of the places they can hit where it hurts are all these legacy subscribers who no longer have contracts. They don't have to be bought out of ETFs. AT&T can change the terms of the contract anytime they want, and they don't have to do anything to appease these customers. Customers can either choose to pay, switch to one of the new, more profitable plans, or leave. So I think it is definitely AT&T being AT&T, and there isn't as much price pressure, for consumers to, feel anymore. I mean, if you're on AT&T, your other choice is Verizon, who historically are a little more expensive, but I think right now are slightly cheaper. And there's T-Mobile, which, unless you're on a family plan, is no cheaper at all. So I think that, AT&T is probably run the numbers on this, estimated how many subscribers they'll bleed versus what their margin increase will be, and decided, yeah, it's absolutely worth it.
Yeah, and when we go into the merger again, I mean, T-Mobile would be picking up a big load of debt from Sprint that dates all the way back to Nextel and fulfilling requirements for LTE on that, and it's just saddled with a whole bunch of other stuff, leasing, like the measures they have taken to balance their books is not going to look good on their books when it comes time to do the accounting. So that's a fun bit of thing to think about. Oh man, but
And
I'm not going to bore you. Oh,
and
go ahead.
I was just gonna say, almost every time we write about it, not necessarily just AT&T, but some carrier raising their prices, there's always a couple people who mention that they're on a legacy plan from like 5 years ago because they just really don't want to change it because newer plans are substantially worse. So I'm sure this will probably help out AT&T a little bit, even if it does make a lot of people understandably angry.
Yeah, even though those people still rub it in their noses that they're
They
on
do.
this.
They do. They're like, I got the $10 T-Mobile plan from like 3 years ago. You guys are suckers.
Mm, I think we've all been sucked into something, into one vortex or another here.
Yeah.
Well, I think I shall let myself out, but before I do, I'm going to do y'all the favor and do the little thing that we're supposed to read here. So, Android Police, we are live 4 times a week. It is amazing that we are, and we thank you, the viewer, the listener, for making it possible for us to do that, because without you, we wouldn't be here. But if you want to show your support, if you want to add on to the love that we have, it's very strong here. The best way that you can do so is by subscribing to Android Police on Twitch, and that is done by going to twitch.tv/Android Police. We have ways of rewarding you. Don't worry about it. We got a special emoji of Ryan. It's he's losing his mind and just getting cracked up. It's amazing. Also, you have extra entries into AP giveaways, and that's always a fun time. Tiers start at $5 a month, but if you have an Amazon Prime account, well, you can do it for free. You can give Amazon's money to us, and you don't have to worry about anything. Not a cent comes out of your bank account. So learn more, twitch.tv/Android Police. You also have the option, if you don't want any of those perks, to head to androidpolice.com and clicking on the donate button, and you can subscribe like that or give a one-time donation. We'd love it either way. Thank you very much. And now, on with the show.
Okay, so I wrote a piece about the Apple Watch this week, which has inflamed most of our audience, to be honest. But I do want to talk about it because I've been using an Apple Watch, and we did talk about the Apple Watch on an earlier episode of the show, like over a month ago, when I'd only been using it for a couple of weeks. And now I've been using it for over a month. I've been using the Apple Watch pretty much every day for about 6 weeks now. And I've gotten a really good sense of how it fits into my life digitally, and what I do and don't like about it, and what I do and don't like about being tied to an iPhone, which there's a lot I don't like about that. But today I really wrote about why I came away from the watch feeling like I don't look at any wearables that are available for Android and feel like I don't feel like there's a comparable experience available. And that's what makes me kind of sad, because I'm going to stop using it. I'm going to stop using the Apple Watch, after I'm done with this little experiment, which will be pretty soon here, probably in the next week or so. I will be sad to stop using the watch, but for the last 2 weeks, I have to confess, since the Pixel 4 XL came out, I have not been using the Apple Watch full time with the iPhone. I've had to basically take the watch, untethered if I'm going out of the house. So it's not connected to my iPhone because my SIM isn't in my iPhone anymore. I could put another SIM in the iPhone to keep it connected and carry 2 phones, but I don't like carrying around 2 phones. So I've been using it, basically if I'm at home, I'm getting all my notifications and everything's connected. But if I'm untethered, I'm basically just using it as a fitness tracker now, which it's really great at. It's actually an excellent fitness tracker. I love the way Apple handles fitness tracking. I love the health app on the Apple Watch and on the iPhone. They're both really good. What I've got an issue with, I think, is with a lot of the Android wearables, none of them have the kind of completeness of experience that Apple has been able to cultivate on the watch so far. And they also just don't feel as polished as products. The Apple Watch is very expensive, but I don't feel like it's a ripoff. I feel like a lot of people may disagree with me about that. But if you buy the base model Apple Watch in the small size, it's like, what, I think it's $380 for the 40 millimeter with one of the basic bands that's included. And so I feel like if you just want the watch and you don't want to spend any extra money, I feel like that's a perfectly reasonable price. The one I bought and configured was $480 for the larger watch with the stainless steel band and everything, which like nobody needs. But
Is that
Apple's
the
really
one with eight? Is that the one with LTE on it or no?
no, I didn't get the LTE model. I thought about it, but then I realized I'm not going to be using it long enough to want to like add that
Yeah.
to my phone plan. It's too obnoxious. If I was like living with it, I probably would have gotten the LTE one so I could like go without the phone when necessary. Stephen
Mhm.
Hall is convinced that the LTE Apple Watch is the only way to live. I'm not sure I completely agree with that, but I understand where he comes from on it. So what I've I guess like my summary on the watch so far has been everything that a smartwatch is supposed to do or that a smartwatch you might envision doing. Generally, the Apple Watch does very well. Granted, you have to use an iPhone. That's the biggest limitation of the Apple Watch. There are no custom watch faces, sure, but that to me is very much that's something that people became very used to with Wear OS and really is not part of the larger smartwatch paradigm, in my opinion. Like a lot of the custom watch faces out there are absolutely terrible. And I feel like Apple has done an excellent job with its built-in ones in terms of making sure you can get a ton of data or very little data. Like mine has on it right now the outside UV, the temperature, the sunset time, my fitness tracker goals, my battery percentage, a world clock, a compass, a calendar, my upcoming events, and a clock. So it's all readable, which is crazy because a lot of times the information density is just too high on a lot of products like this. And so after using this and really like living with it for 6 weeks, I wouldn't tell anybody with an Android phone to go buy a wearable right now unless it was like a basic fitness tracker. Like I could see wanting a step counter for Android, and anything beyond that to me, I think most of the products out there just aren't very compelling. And I know Corbin doesn't agree with me. So Corbin's probably a good counterpoint for this. So we should discuss, like what do we think that, Google and Samsung are going to bring to the table in the next couple of years that can kind of counter what Apple's offered here. Because right now, I think Android users are without a compelling alternative, something that really like the one product that stands out and says, no, this is the one that's going in the right direction. Unless Corbin, you think there is a product that really is moving that way.
Um, See, I'm not. I use a lot of wearables. Like I've got a Fossil on right now. I have a OG Galaxy watch I use a lot too, but I don't heavily use the health features, so I'm not the best case for this. Um, Actually, I have a counter question for you. Have you used any of Samsung's watches lately?
I've read about them. I read a few reviews before writing this post. I think that
Hmm.
Samsung is like where they're really doing well. Battery life, obviously. I think Samsung battery life, like the Apple Watch, I can eke out 2 days when I need to. It's really more like 1.5, never less than a day though. I think the other area where a lot of people are big fans, honestly, is just because they're round and people like the way they look. I think that the Apple Watch is a very divisive aesthetic. A lot of people really, really immediately knee jerk and say, no, I hate the idea of this rectangle watch. I think it's really ugly. And so I think people just end up gravitating toward, well, this is the one reasonably decent round smartwatch for Android right now, which seems to be what Samsung has. And as a notification buzzer, I'm sure the Gear Active 2 is fine. If that's what you're using it for, just to buzz you with notifications and manage them, okay. I'm sure that works for you. But the Apple Watch is more than that. And I don't know that Samsung's, from what I've read, really offers more. Like third-party app support is basically non-existent. The Apple Watch has third-party apps and they do things that are useful. Like even Wear OS hasn't been able to do that. Wear OS has lost apps.
Yeah, it's well, rewinding back a little bit. I do agree. I probably prefer square watches. Up until a little while ago, I would still occasionally use like my like the original LG watch, because it's just notifications are so much nicer on it. It doesn't, you don't lose all that space that you do with a round watch. Um, I for the app situation, I don't know. The app situation on both is very strange because first of all, Wear OS is definitely bleeding apps even more than it was before. Like even a lot of Google apps haven't been updated in ages for that. Meanwhile, uh, Samsung's platform, it's still not great, but they do have a couple big names on board, and actually oddly enough, Google is increasing their support for Samsung's watches. There's a YouTube app for the Watch Active 2 that I haven't tried, but it's there for some reason. If people really want to watch YouTube
That is
videos on their
weird.
watch, it is very strange. But I don't. I don't. It's. I don't know. It's hard to put into words because Wear OS is in a very strange place in general because first of all, I don't think it's dead like a lot of people love to lambast about, but Google's very particular in where they're working on it. Like the OS itself is still getting improvements because they just changed the whole interface like 4 months ago. But meanwhile, a lot of their apps on the platform are just not getting touched and they're actually going away. Like the Hangouts app stopped working months ago. I know like I still get issues with like the Google Keep app and a couple others. So it's very strange, and it's not even, you can't just blame like a lack of good smartwatch processors as the main issue, because Google can change the app situation even if it's only with their apps. So it's a bunch of factors that are keeping Wear OS from doing well, and it also doesn't help that they have basically one partner now, and that's Fossil.
Yeah, and I think the app situation is one that really came to strike me after using the Apple Watch. I don't use apps on the watch all the time, and I don't think
Yeah.
anybody does. But when the situation arises where I know I've got certain apps and they do useful things, like for example, if I'm getting on a flight and I save my boarding pass to Apple Wallet, the boarding pass appears on my watch and I slap my wrist against the little scanner and I can board the plane. Like it's super easy. Android Wear, that becomes a little harder. I mean, I'm sure there are some solutions out there that exist, but it's built into the Apple Watch. It's super simple. It presents it to you when you need it. Other examples, if I'm listening to a podcast on Pocket Cast, the full Pocket Cast app appears on my watch if I start playing back a podcast on Pocket Cast. So I don't just get basic media controls. I get the Pocket Cast specific ones for skipping, for advancing, for speeding up the episode, for doing a volume boost if it's too quiet, like the stuff that otherwise you'd have to go onto your phone and mess with it.
Yeah.
Other ones like Authy. Like I can't count the number of times I've had to set up a new device and my phone is like in the other room. And I'm like, I want to sign into this. And I really don't want to get up and get my phone and open Authy and look at the code. Just pop open the Apple Watch, open the Authy app real quick, just scroll through them and pick which app I want to sign into. And this isn't a hard thing to do. Authy could do this for Wear OS. I don't believe they have a Wear OS app. Correct me if I'm wrong on this. Maybe they do, but
I'm not sure about Authy. I do use Google Authenticator on my watch
yeah,
though.
I have to use, I use Authy just because of the cloud stuff. Like I need
Yeah.
the keys stored in the cloud, but it's just simple stuff like that. So I mean, there have been a few apps where I've been like, oh wow, that's actually pretty useful. It makes sense from a certain standpoint. Google Keep does work on the Apple Watch. Spotify works as well as it works anywhere, which is not very well. And then there are the first party apps that are built in. Like I think one of the ones like the workout app is really well designed. It's really nice. It automatically detects workouts. Like there's certain like just very smart things about it. Like if I go like get on the treadmill and I walk for like 7 minutes, the watch will ping me and say, "Hey, are you doing a workout? Do you want to start recording?" And it will also pull in the last 7 minutes of walking I was doing, because it's like, "Oh, you were already doing this. We're just going to pull in that data and aggregate it into a single workout record," which makes more
Mhm.
sense. And so you get it, the Apple Watch feels like it's trying to help you a lot of times in the way that I always felt like Wear OS, you had to help yourself a lot. And the Apple Watch seems to be very good at being proactive about presenting you information and just giving you the functionality that a smartwatch is, which admittedly, there's just a sliver of functionality that a smartwatch is good for compared to a phone. There are things that watches just suck at. I totally understand, but the Apple Watch has been pretty, and I think everything about it is intuitively designed. It's thoughtful. Even navigating it is so much easier. The digital crown to me is like one of the best things Apple's ever come up with. Like it gives you like little haptic feedback as you spin it. When you hit the end of a scroll, it bumps on the Taptic engine. It makes interacting with the watch feel nice. So I'm kind of going back again to why I like it, but uh, I think that the reason with Samsung and Google, I'm just not as enthused is because I don't get the sense that either of these companies care about wearables in a long-term way in terms of what a customer gets out of the experience. Whereas I think for Apple, their entire goal to control this market is to convince you that when you use the Apple Watch, you're getting value out of it. It's not just a product for the sake of filling a segment. Apple is really concerned with like, okay, let's come up with reasons for people to engage with the product rather than saying, well, you've got notifications, you've got fitness tracking, you've got, telling the time and passive data. But
Yeah.
I don't know. I just think with the Apple Watch, everything's a lot more thoughtful. It's very stable. It's very fast for the most part, and I just don't know that I never saw that level of thoughtfulness. And also, I know that Samsung's fitness tracking is notoriously inaccurate. Not to say Apple's is perfect, but it's one of those things where I know everybody wants a different thing out of the product. And I think that's perfectly valid. Like if you just want a notification buzzer, something that tells you when you've got messages and emails, an Apple Watch is like too expensive to do just that.
Yeah.
That's not as good of a use case for an Apple Watch, honestly. It'll look good doing it, but notification management on the Apple Watch is actually probably one of its weakest points, which shocking. iPhones are terrible at notifications, so is the watch.
Mhm.
But to me, they're actually one of the smaller parts of the experience. So I think it depends
Yeah.
what you want.
Yeah, and that's definitely where I come from is I want one 90% for notifications and 10% other apps. Like I'm kind of in the same range as you where I don't really use a ton of apps on my watch. It basically just Google Keep or Authenticator to read two-factor codes. So yeah, I'm it. I don't know. There's a and we were kind of talking about this. I think either on the last Q&A or the last podcast I was on, where there's so many directions Google could take their wearable platform now that they have Fitbit. Are they going to throw out Wear OS for the most part and just leave it to Fossil to keep working on it, or are there are they both going to be developed in tandem, which is kind of what their blog post said they were going to do? Or will they merge at some point, and how much of each platform will end up in the finished product? So there's a lot of ways that Google could potentially fix this now that they've got someone who at least cares about fitness underneath their belt. Um,
Yeah, it's possible. So I think we should probably move on to another wearable that was announced this week. Unfortunately, we haven't had a chance to test it out, which is one of these hybrid watches, which I have long had zero interest in, but don't seem to be going away. So it's by Fossil. It's called the Fossil Hybrid HR. It's not running really any software to speak of. So it's all just custom stuff. And the phone needs a dedicated app to pair with the watch. It's an activity and sleep tracker, a heart rate monitor. It does alarms, and it can be used to do music playback controls. But it's like an e-ink display, basically, and it
yeah,
should last 2 weeks on a charge, which is a very long time. And it's relatively affordable, $195 to $215, and that really just gets you different dials more than anything. But I think that looking at this, my number one concern is exactly how many years from now will Fossil completely abandon this product, which I think seems like a reasonable concern to have for a company like Fossil, who I think are into wearables for the fact that they're a watch and not into wearables for the fact that they're a technology product and technology products need support. And I just don't know if I trust Fossil to do that. So I would have questions about like, how buggy is this app going to be? If I have a bug when like my phone gets a new version of an OS, is Fossil going to fix it? How long will it take them? I don't know if I trust Fossil as a company to deal with those kinds of problems.
Yeah, and I'm kind of in the same idea as you, where I haven't really cared about hybrid watches in the past, because usually they've been regular mechanical watches with like the tiniest indicator for notifications or something on the side, or someplace. But this is kind of like the LG hybrid watch that came out a few months ago, where it's a Wear OS watch, but it has the real hands on top of the screen. So it's a little bit beefier than a lot of the hybrid watches we've seen before, and the interface looks a lot like Wear OS, to the point where I thought when the leaks first came out that it might be running some variant of Wear OS, but that doesn't seem to be the case. Um, yeah, I mean, I don't know. Again, we don't know anything about what the software will be like. I'm definitely excited to try it because it looks nicer than a lot of the other hybrid watches we've seen. And it is surprising to me how much it seems to have, given its 2-week battery life. Even if that's off by a lot, it still does heart rate. It still is waterproof, sleep tracking, alarms. It can show notifications behind the watch face. So it still gets like 80% of what people use a smartwatch for, and manages to blow all of them out of the water when it comes to battery life, assuming that's correct. But it doesn't have an LCD screen running all the time. So I can't imagine that estimate's very much off. So yeah, I'm excited to try one and see how it compares to Wear OS and Samsung watches. There's actually 2 models available already. They have the Charter HR, which is kind of their women's watch, and the bigger Collider watch for men, and it starts at 195, which is not too expensive as far as smartwatches go.
Yeah, I think that's not a terrible price or anything. I don't know. I feel like from the health and activity side, my question is, where are you putting this data? What app is analyzing it? And are you getting any insight? Like, so it can track activity, it can track your sleep, it's a heart rate monitor. Are you putting this into Google Fit? In which case, like, why? Because Google Fit is an objectively terrible application. I wish Google Fit was better. It's a pretty
Yeah.
UI, but it sucks. It's just bad.
And it's been broken on and off too. Like I remember Rita a couple months ago wrote a post about how some integration part of Fit has just been broken for a really long time and hasn't got fixed.
Yeah, and where Fit has always been a compromised application. After using Apple Health and the Apple Activity app, like no contest, like Fit is a terrible compromised product. And I think that Fitbit has been like kind of the one like light in the light in the darkness of a company that really does care about aggregating data and like trying to give you a little bit more of a holistic health picture. But they generally haven't been quite is on the ball about it, and also Fitbit software is notoriously buggy. So it's kind of a compromise there. And so I think with Fossil, like to me, it's like, well, yes, the hardware can track all of this data, but the data is only as good as the software you're then putting it into. And I don't know that there are a lot of apps on Android that I look at and say, oh, well, that's I think somewhere where I want to keep my health data for a long time. Because a lot of times once you put your health data into an app, you can never get it back out again. So you're stuck in that ecosystem, and that can really suck. Granted, with Apple, you don't have much of a choice. You have Apple. So, I mean, you
Yeah.
have other apps too, because the Apple has the health APIs, which is actually a fairly big advantage that iOS has over Android at this point on the health stuff. But
Yeah.
I just don't know where I'd put this data.
Yeah, and I did see from Michael Fisher already had his review up, and I did see from his coverage that you can connect the data to Google Fit and whatever Under Armour's health thing is. I didn't even know they had one, so maybe that's better than Google Fit. It wouldn't take much effort.
No, it really wouldn't. So, I mean, I'll be curious if we review this product, what whoever takes a look at it has to say. But I
I'm
still
taking a look at
remain okay. So I'll be curious to see what you have to say. I still just don't know if I have much of an interest in hybrid devices. Also, I hate e-ink. I just can't stand e-ink screens. I think they look terrible. So I would
Yeah,
never buy this, but
the one thing that does look really janky is again they didn't give me any pictures of this, and now I understand why from Michael's video, where when it's dark and you want to see what's on the screen, you press a button that sort of lights up sort of lights up the background, but it's not a universal backlight. It looks like four tiny flashlights are pointing inwards from the bezel, and it's it looks pretty bad. It's like a really cheap digital watch. So we'll see.
exciting.
Yeah.
So actually, we have some questions from the chat this week. One from Zero. I wonder if the Xiaomi Mi Watch is any good. And based on pictures we've seen, it's a custom Chinese version of Wear OS. So I think that in a lot of ways, the question is moot, because bringing that product into the US would probably make it effectively useless, because it won't work with any Google stuff. So I don't know if it's a good question to ask for most people.
Yeah, that might end up being like the Mate 30, where it's really only a good option if you live in China, basically.
Yeah, I think that's almost certainly the case with the product. I think a lot of people have started talking about it because it looks like the Apple Watch. The interface is a blatant ape of Watch OS.
It looks exactly like it.
Yeah. So I think that Xiaomi is doing what it's always done, which is frankly shamelessly copying Apple. That's how they got their start, and glad to see it's moving on to wearables the same way. Saul Donna says, I feel like if you can find a Wear OS watch in the $100 to $200 range, that's a good option for Android users. I mean, if you just want a notification buzzer and that's all you care about, then sure. I think a used or refurbished Wear OS watch is probably fine.
I think there's a Tick watch that's like $150 and it'll do that. But
yeah, I just think that a lot of people are still searching for what they want out of a wearable, and most people, the only use case they can envision really is it can count my steps and it sends me notifications. And I think that's kind of it's a more limited scope in terms of what a wearable can do and what it can be and how pleasant it can be to use. And if you don't really care about a lot of the niceties, then yeah, I guess a Wear OS watch in that price range might meet your expectations. I just think that Android users have become a little browbeat having to deal with it that long, and so we don't expect much. I think that's kind of the sad part.
yeah, and after using the Fossil Gen 5, which is the first Wear OS watch in a long time to or maybe ever to have a gig of RAM instead of 512 or 700 megs, it's really hard for me to go back to Wear OS watches with less RAM, because the increased RAM and storage eliminates like 90% of Wear OS jank.
Yeah.
Like you still have all the other problems, like not amazing battery life and middling app support, but like I tried to go back to my Fossil Sport a little while ago, and it's just it's really bad. It's animations are really slow. It'll just sometimes exit things for no reason. So I almost feel like, kind of like with laptops, where if you can't spend maybe $500 or $600, you should really just buy used. I think that kind of applies to Wear OS too.
Yeah.
Like maybe see if you can get. I mean, Fossil's watches go on sale all the time, so maybe you can get one of the Gen 5s for cheaper soon.
Our final comment comes from our very own Zach Laidlaw, who says, typing on the Apple Watch is not pleasant, which I agree with. You should not be typing on a smartwatch, period. He also says that voice dictation is painful. I disagree. I think maybe a few generations ago with the Apple Watch that might have been true, but with the new processors and the new on-device dictation stuff, I had no problems at all. It actually works really well. Siri is weirdly one of my favorite parts of the Apple Watch. Siri is hot garbage on the iPhone, but on a watch, what do you expect the virtual assistant to do? Basic voice commands, and Siri totally excels at it. Responding to messages worked fine for me. Setting timers, alarms, like checking the weather, that kind of stuff works perfectly fine. Like I had no problems whatsoever. I will say the hot word detection on the Apple Watch is not so great. It doesn't work most of the time. So there is that.
Yeah,
But Siri's pretty fast.
That's kind of my opinion of Bixby on the Samsung watches as well. Like if they're really bad on the phones, but on the watch, it does everything I need it to do. So
yeah. Jules, I think we can probably skip this last story here. We're already running pretty long. We can cut this out of the show. Okay, and I will skip to the outro here, and we'll pretend like we never skipped a beat. 1, 2, 3. So that wraps up this week's episode, and we're wondering, how are you liking the Android Police podcast? We've been running with this new format for the past month, and we'd really love to hear what you think about it, what we can improve, and overall, just how we're doing. If you head to the link below, so I have to read this out. Okay. Oh, boy. Okay. bit.ly/surveyandpo. We need to come up with a new URL. Survey text takes 10 minutes or less. All answers are sent anonymously. And again, that's bit.ly/surveyandpo. And you can check the show description for an easy link to that survey, which will probably be easier than listening to me spell out the letters. We also welcome your feedback via email. That's at podcast@androidpolice.com. On Twitter, I'm RDRV3. Corbin is Corbin Davenport, and our producer Jules Wang is at Point Jules. Our theme music is by Home, and if everything goes right, we should have 2 guest books for next week, so look forward to that. Until then, take care and have a great weekend.